47 calls. My phone rang 47 times that Tuesday afternoon, and every single time I let it ring. With each call, I could almost hear the panic rising in my son Daniel's voice. "Dad, please answer. Dad, we need to talk. Dad, don't do this to me." But it was already too late for begging. What I had uncovered 3 days before had shaken my world, and there was no turning back. It all began on Father's Day. My son, 38 years old, placed a wrinkled envelope in my hand while at the very same moment he handed the keys of a shining silver Mercedes-Benz to his father-in-law, Alejandro Castillo. Inside my envelope was nothing more than a $50 department store gift card. $50. Meanwhile, Alejandro, who Daniel had only known for 2 short years since marrying Sofia, was gifted a car worth $200,000. And me, Victor Alvarez, the man who raised Daniel alone from the time he was 6 when his mother walked away, received a gift card that couldn't even buy a proper dinner. I was the man who had worked 3 exhausting shifts for 15 long years to pay for his medical school, who sold the house of my childhood just to fund his specialization, who never once said no to his requests in almost 4 decades of life. When you raise a child alone, every choice feels heavy, every sacrifice feels necessary, and every yes feels like love. But sometimes, love given without limits can raise a stranger you no longer recognize. That Sunday morning, I drove my old Corolla toward Daniel's house, a smile spread across my face. In the back seat sat a heavy toolbox filled with German tools he had been talking about for months. They had cost me 2 entire retirement paychecks, but my heart told me, it's Father's Day. My son deserves the best. During the drive, I imagined his surprise, his face lighting up, his arms wrapping around me with the words, "Dad, you didn't have to spend so much." Words that, deep down, I realized he had never truly spoken in his adult life. Stay with me until the very end, because this story carries a powerful lesson you shouldn't miss. If the video touches your heart, give it a like, and in the comments tell me the name of your city so I know where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next story. If you have your own story and want it to be told here, just write in the comments, "I have a story." My team will contact you and we will publish your story on this channel. Now, back to the story. On the way, I stopped at a gas station to fill the tank and buy flowers for Sofia. Even after 2 years of marriage, I still tried to win her respect. Still wanted to be the kind of father-in-law she could be proud of. I paid $50 for the bouquet money I didn't know then would become the cruelest irony. The young man at the counter, who knew me by sight, smiled and said, "Mr. Antonio, what beautiful flowers. Is it Mrs. Sofia's birthday?" "Father's Day," I answered with pride. "I'm having lunch with my family." "That's wonderful, Mr. Antonio. You deserve it. I always see you working hard, always busy." At 71, I was still doing small consulting jobs to add to my pension. Not because I needed much for myself, but because Daniel always had another emergency that demanded more money. When I arrived, the gate was wide open and I could hear excited voices coming from the backyard. I walked slowly along the side of the house, and the sight that met me stopped me cold. There was Daniel, glowing with pride like I had never seen before, holding out the shining keys of a brand new Mercedes to Alejandro. "Happy Father's Day, father-in-law," he shouted, his voice full of joy. Alejandro wrapped Sofia in his arms as if he had just won the lottery. "Oh, my wonderful son-in-law," Alejandro said, stroking the hood of the car like it was a priceless treasure. "You shouldn't have spent so much. This is unbelievable." Sofia, meanwhile, was busy streaming the entire moment live on Instagram. "Look, everyone, my husband just gave my father a Mercedes for Father's Day. What a blessed man my dad is to have such a generous son-in-law." The word blessed echoed inside my head like the crack of a gun. Blessed. Alejandro was blessed because Daniel gave him a car worth $200,000. And me? What did that make me, the man who had raised him alone for decades? I stood there unseen, clutching my costly toolbox and the flowers no one would ever notice, watching a stranger celebrate a man he had only known for 2 years while I faded into the background. Guests crowded around Alejandro, touching the car, praising its beauty. I caught pieces of their words. Daniel is such an amazing son-in-law. Alejandro is truly lucky. What a successful man Daniel has become. Each sentence cut into me like a knife. Then Daniel's eyes landed on me. "Dad, you're here," he said, forcing a smile I had seen many times before. He walked over, holding out a small wrinkled envelope. "This is for you." In front of all those watching eyes, I opened it carefully. A gift card, $50, department store. The air grew heavy, and silence spread across the crowd. Some faces showed pity, others embarrassment. Sophia lowered her phone. Alejandra coughed, clearly uncomfortable. "Thank you, son," I forced myself to say, steadying my voice as much as I could. "That's very kind. Sorry, Dad, I've just been really busy. I'll get you something better next week," Daniel muttered quickly before hurrying back toward the Mercedes celebration. But as the guests returned to admiring the car, one thought burned in my mind. Daniel was a doctor, yes, but I knew exactly how much he earned. I knew his bills, his lifestyle, half of it still covered by me. How could he possibly afford a $200,000 car? At lunch, I sat quietly at the far end of the table, almost invisible. Every conversation circled back to Alejandro and his new Mercedes, its leather seats, its powerful engine, its shining details, while I sat there forgotten, like I wasn't even part of the family gathering. What a powerful engine, real leather seats, this must have cost a fortune. Those were the words floating around the table, and each one made Daniel shine even brighter, as though the Mercedes had been gifted to him instead of Alejandro. Sophia clicked photo after photo, filling her social media with images of her father and the car, while little Ethan and Noah laughed and ran circles around their grandpa's shiny new prize. At one point, I overheard Alejandro speaking proudly to a friend. "You know, John, Daniel is not like other sons-in-law. He understands how important family connections are. This gift, it's an investment in the future." Investment. That single word pounded in my head like a drum. Was I nothing more than a failed investment? A bad bargain after all the sacrifices I had made? I excused myself from the table and went to the bathroom, not because I needed to, but because I needed air, space, silence. Staring into the mirror, I saw a weary old man, hair gone white, eyes sunken, a man who had given every piece of himself to raise a son who now treated him like a useless burden. When I returned, Daniel's voice reached me. He was speaking confidently to his brother-in-law. "Alejandro has real power at the hospital. He knows the director personally. A strong relationship with him could open all kinds of doors for me." And in that moment, the truth cut through me like a blade. My own son had placed me on the altar and sacrificed me for his ambition, trading my dignity for career favors. I stood, smiled politely, and said I needed to leave early. No one tried to stop me. Daniel didn't even move from his seat to walk me to the door. He only called out, "Bye, Dad. Thanks for the tools," without even opening the box I had worked so hard to buy. On the drive home, the dam broke. Tears of humiliation, betrayal, and a deep, nameless pain streamed down my face. I had not cried like that since the day we buried Patriciana. I pulled my car onto the shoulder and sobbed like a child left alone in the world. 3 days later, another blow struck me, harsher than the first. While sorting through my bank papers, I noticed something unusual, an automatic transfer of $15,000 to Daniel's account. I had no memory of authorizing it. Alarmed, I called the bank. "Oh yes, Mr. Antonio," said Mr. Salazar, the manager who had served me for years. "That transfer has been running for 8 months now. You approved it when your son explained he needed a temporary loan for medical equipment." Medical equipment? $15,000 each month for 8 months. That was $120,000 gone, and I had completely forgotten. "Mr. Salazar," I said, steadying my voice, "please send me a full statement. Every transaction for the last 2 years. Of course, Mr. Antonio, I'll email it to you right away. But that was only the beginning. Once I started going through the documents, a flood of lies revealed themselves. Money transfers I couldn't recall, extra credit card payments Daniel had used for his so-called emergencies, loans I had signed for, and he never mentioned again. Each discovery hit me like a slap across the face. Every new line I uncovered felt like a slap to the face. A loan for clinic renovation, $25,000 in March. But what renovation? The clinic didn't even belong to him. Then there was a so-called medical emergency for Sophia, $15,000 in May. What emergency? She was perfectly healthy. And then an investment in advanced medical equipment, $30,000 in June. What equipment? There was none. I spent the entire night bent over the papers, adding numbers, checking dates, comparing records. By the time the sun came up, the truth was clear. $340,000 in 2 years. Almost every dollar of my retirement savings was gone. Daniel had drained me dry, and with my own money, he had bought his father-in-law that Mercedes. My savings, my sacrifices, had paid for my public humiliation. At 5 a.m., I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by mountains of bank statements. Anger burned in me, but there was also sickness in my stomach, a deep shame. How could I have been so blind? How could I have let this go on? But the money wasn't even the worst part. What cut deepest was knowing my son had looked me in the eye for 2 whole years and lied without hesitation. Every emergency, every investment, every loan had been nothing but carefully planned deceit. That morning, sitting in my old armchair with the papers scattered across the floor like broken glass, I made a choice that would change everything. I called the bank. I want to cancel all automatic transfers, every single one. Mr. Antonio, are you certain? There are several active transfers, the clerk asked carefully. I'm certain, I said firmly. And cancel all extra cards tied to my account as well. Very well, sir. I'll process this immediately. When I hung up, a strange feeling came over me, something I hadn't felt in years. Control. For the first time in decades, I had taken back my own life. The first call came on Tuesday at 2 in the afternoon. I was outside in the garden, watering my tomatoes, when the phone rang. Daniel. I let it ring. At 2:15 it rang again, at 2:30 again. By 312 missed calls, I finally picked up on the 13th. Dad, where are you? Why aren't you answering? His voice was tight, not with worry but with fear. I'm at home, Daniel. What's the matter? Yes, something's wrong. My card was declined at the pharmacy. The bank told me my transfers were cancelled too. What happened? I could hear it clearly. It wasn't concern for me. It was financial panic. Panic from a man who had just seen his lifeline cut. I cancelled everything this morning, I said calmly, as if I were talking about the weather. There was silence on the other end. Heavy silence. What? Why? Because I discovered something, Daniel. I discovered that in the last 2 years, you pulled $340,000 out of my accounts. I found out you used my money to buy that Mercedes for your father-in-law. Dad, that's not. I can explain. Explain? Tell me how you thought it was right to take my money just to humiliate your own father. It wasn't like that, Daniel rushed. I had to impress Sophia's family. Alejandro has strong connections at the hospital. This was an investment in my future. And there it was, the ugly truth, spoken without shame. I had been sacrificed for social climbing, for networking. An investment, I repeated slowly. Interesting choice of word. And me, Daniel, what kind of investment am I? Where do I fit into your calculations? You're my father, he snapped. Fathers are supposed to help their children. Fathers, I replied firmly, help children who honor and respect them. They don't bankroll grown men who use them like an ATM machine. This is insane, Daniel shouted. You're destroying our family over a gift card. No, son, I said quietly. You destroyed this family when you decided I was worth $50, while a man you've only known for 2 years was worth $200,000. I ended the call. 20 minutes later, The sound of screeching tires broke the silence outside. I looked out the window and saw Sophia's BMW, the car I had partly paid for, parked in my driveway. Bitter truth hit me again. Even her car had my fingerprints on it. Daniel stormed out like a hurricane, pounding on the door as though he would break it down. "Dad, open the door. We need to fix this." I opened slowly. He barged in without invitation, his face red with fury. "Can you tell me what this madness is? Why did you shut everything off?" "Sit down, Daniel," I said, pointing at the sofa. "Let's talk like grown men." He dropped onto the edge of the couch, his body tense like he was ready to spring. "I want you to turn it all back on, reactivate everything." "And what do I get in return?" I asked calmly. "In return? I'm your son. You don't need anything in return." I walked away and returned with a box I had prepared in advance. Inside were all the bank statements, receipts, every piece of evidence from the last 2 years. I dropped them onto the table in front of him. "Do you know what this is, Daniel? This is $340,000. Money you drained from my accounts in just 2 years. Shall we go through them one by one?" His face drained of color, as though he had seen a ghost. "Dad, I can explain every penny. Can you explain this one?" I interrupted, pulling out a paper. $15,000 in March for medical equipment. "What equipment, Daniel?" Silence. I held up another. $20,000 in May for Sophia's medical emergency. "What emergency?" "I spoke to her yesterday. She was perfectly fine." His hands began to shake. "And here," I said, lifting my favorite piece of proof, $30,000 in June for clinic investment. "What investment? You're not even a partner in the clinic." "Dad, I know, Daniel. You lied. Not once, not twice. You lied to me systematically for 2 whole years." I stood and walked to the window, my back to him. My voice was low, heavy. "And do you know what cuts the deepest? It isn't the money. It's realizing my own son became a liar." "I'm not a liar," Daniel fired back. I needed to maintain a standard." "What standard?" I asked coldly. "The standard of pretending to be successful with your father's money." He exploded. "You don't get it. You don't understand the pressure I live under. Alejandro earns 3 times more than me. Sophia's family has real money. I have to keep up. Keep up using my money?" I shot back. "It was temporary," he insisted. "I was going to return every cent once my career took off." "When, Daniel? When you're 50, 60, or maybe when I'm dead?" His face crumbled, tears rolling down. "Dad, please, I know I made mistakes, but you can't just cut me off like this. I have responsibilities." "Responsibilities?" I leaned forward. "Responsibilities you created with my savings." I looked him directly in the eyes. "Do you want to hear the truth? That Mercedes you handed to Alejandro, I paid for it. Your new apartment, I financed the down payment. That vacation in Europe you bragged about on Instagram, my credit card covered it. The kitchen renovation, Sophia's English course, your children's private school, every single thing came from my pocket." Daniel went quiet, his eyes fixed on the bank statement spread across the table like evidence in a trial. Finally, he muttered almost to himself, You financed your own humiliation, Dad." "Exactly," I said, my voice like stone. "I paid $200,000 just to be treated like I was worth 50. His tears fell faster. "I didn't think of it that way. I swear I never thought of it that way." "No. Then tell me, Daniel," I pressed. "How did you think of it? How does it make sense to use your father's money to buy respect from your wife's father?" He buried his face in his hands, desperate. "I thought you would understand. I thought you'd see it was strategic." "Strategic," I repeated, my voice bitter. "So humiliating your own father is a strategy?" "Alejandro can recommend me for the hospital board," Daniel argued. "He has influence. If I stayed on his good side—" "If you prostituted yourself financially," I cut in. "It wasn't prostitution," he cried. It was an investment in my future." "With whose money, Daniel?" I asked quietly. "With whose future?" I stood again, but this time it wasn't anger that moved me. It was exhaustion, a deep, hollow disappointment. "You're 38 years old, a doctor. You have a specialization I worked my whole life to pay for. You have everything a man needs to succeed, and still you chose to live like a parasite. Don't call me a parasite, he shouted. Then tell me, what should I call you? I asked sharply, because sons don't lie to their fathers for 2 years straight. Sons don't steal their father's dignity just to impress strangers. Daniel jumped up, pacing back and forth across the room like a trapped animal. Fine, you're right, you're absolutely right. I'd been a terrible son. I'm a liar, I'm a parasite. Is that what you want to hear? I looked at him, my voice heavy with finality. No, Daniel, I don't want to hear anything anymore. I told him calmly that it was time for him to leave my house and finally learn how to live like the adult he always pretended to be. But Daniel blocked my way to the door, his voice shaking as he begged me to wait. He said he could pay it all back, that he could even sell Alejandro's Mercedes and give me the money. I looked at him and asked with what money he planned to do that, because his real salary barely covered his own household expenses. He quickly offered to get a loan, maybe take a second job, anything to prove he could fix it. I asked him if all of this was just another attempt to buy me back, to buy my forgiveness like he bought Alejandro's approval. His eyes went wide, and he insisted it wasn't about that, but I told him it was exactly that. He still couldn't understand that none of this was about money. It was about him looking me in the eyes on Father's Day and deciding that I was worth no more than $50. It was about him using my own savings to humiliate me in front of strangers. It was about him lying straight to my face for 2 years as if I were a fool. And it was about him turning his own father's love into a bottomless bank account. Daniel collapsed onto the sofa and buried his face in his hands. His voice came muffled as he admitted he hadn't known how to tell me the truth, that he had been too afraid of disappointing me. I pulled his hands away so that he would look at me directly. I told him disappointment was not the word for what he had done. I reminded him that I had worked 60 hours a week for 15 years to give him a chance at life, that I had sold everything his mother left me just to pay for his studies, and that I had never remarried because I wanted all my time, all my resources, to go to him. And after all that, he sat there and told me he was only afraid of disappointing me. No, I told him. He had not disappointed me. He had destroyed me. He broke into sobs, not the cries of a grown man, but of a child. He begged me for another chance, just one last chance, promising he could change. But I told him there would be no more chances. I had given him chances for 38 years. What I would give him now was a lesson that actions always have consequences, that lies always carry a price, and that respect is never bought, it is earned. Daniel suddenly jumped to his feet, his eyes flashing with that familiar expression I had seen when he was a boy, the look he wore whenever he was about to manipulate me. He quickly changed the subject and asked if I had thought about Sophia, reminding me she wasn't to blame. Then he mentioned the boys, Ethan and Noah, saying they would suffer the most if I cut him off like this. And there it was, the card I had known he would eventually play. My grandsons, 7 and 9 years old, innocent children who adored their grandfather. He pressed harder, asking how I would explain to them that their grandfather would no longer be able to help the family, and worse, how I would tell them that their father was a liar who had stolen from his own father. He flinched as though I had struck him and whispered that I was being cruel. I told him cruel was something else entirely. Cruel was using children as a shield for his failures. Cruel was dragging innocent souls into the mess he had created. He argued that he wasn't using anyone, that he was simply thinking about his family. I couldn't help but ask him where this great sense of family had been when he chose to humiliate me in public. And still, with tears in his eyes, he pleaded with me one last time. "Please, Dad, for the boys." Daniel's voice cracked as he said the boys didn't deserve to suffer for his mistakes. I walked to the door and pulled it open, answering calmly that he was right. They didn't deserve it. That was exactly why Ethan and Noah would always be welcome in my home. They could always count on me, and even Sophia would never be turned away. But him, my son, needed to understand a truth he had avoided his whole life. Being a father is not only about handing out money. I told him that his children needed a father who acted like a real man, someone who worked for his own living, who didn't build his life on lies, and who actually understood the value of things. He argued they would suffer financially without my support, but I told him that maybe in that suffering they would learn something precious, values. Something he himself never learned, because I had failed to teach him when I should have. Daniel stopped at the doorway, his face pale, and turned one last time. He asked me what he should do if he really needed me, if a true emergency came. I looked at him, this man who was once my little boy but now felt like a stranger, and I told him to call Alejandro. Maybe the Mercedes he had gifted him could lend some cash in a crisis. His face froze, and without another word he stormed out, slamming the door so hard that the pictures on the wall rattled. From the window, I watched him climb into the BMW, another thing my money had bought, and speed away, tires screaming against the asphalt until there was nothing left but silence. For the first time in decades, my house was truly quiet. No phone buzzing with urgent calls, no desperate messages demanding thousands for another so-called emergency, no constant weight of wondering when the next request for money would arrive. The silence was heavy, almost frightening at first. For 38 years, my entire life had revolved around Daniel. Every morning I woke thinking about how to help him. Every night I fell asleep worrying about his troubles. Every financial decision I ever made was tied to what he might ask for next. And now I was left staring at myself, realizing I didn't even know who Antonio Mendez was when he wasn't the father bank, the provider who never said no. During that first week, I caught myself more than once picking up the phone to call Daniel just to check if he was fine, but each time I stopped before dialing. It wasn't pride that kept me from calling, it was clarity. I finally saw how my constant worrying, my endless rescuing, had created the selfish man who walked out of my door. One night, lying in bed, I thought about all the things I had abandoned in the last 20 years. The trips I had cancelled because Daniel needed money. The dreams I had postponed because there was always an emergency. The countless chances for happiness I had sacrificed on the altar of misguided parenthood. By the second week, I began to notice small but powerful changes. I was sleeping better, free from the constant fear of Daniel's demands. For the first time in years, my bank account remained steady. I even realized I could buy something for myself without first calculating how much Daniel might come asking for. And in those quiet moments, I began to taste something I hadn't felt in a very long time: freedom. One afternoon I walked past a bookstore and saw a poetry book in the window that I had been eyeing for months. I bought it without hesitation. It cost $50, the exact value of the gift card Daniel had given me. The irony made me laugh bitterly. In the third week, while organizing old things, I came across a forgotten notebook at the bottom of the closet. It belonged to my late wife Patriciana, who had died when Daniel was still a boy. Tucked among her letters, the notebook was worn but full of her neat handwriting. One page was marked with a yellow post-it in her hand. It read, "Antonio, if something happens to me, remember that raising a strong child is more important than raising a comfortable child. Don't deprive him of the struggles that will make him a man." I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching that notebook, and cried in a way I hadn't allowed myself to in years. Patriciana had always known. She saw clearly what I could not, that my heart would push me to shield Daniel from everything, even from the consequences of his mistakes. And she was right. I had done exactly what she feared. I kept turning the pages slowly, reading her thoughts. On one page she had written, "Daniel needs to learn that the world owes him nothing. Antonio has too soft a heart. I hope he finds the strength to say no when necessary." On another, she had written about our talk of giving Daniel an allowance. "Antonio wants to give much more than is healthy. I need to convince him that love isn't money. He works too hard to provide things Daniel doesn't even value. I fear what will happen when Daniel grows up thinking life will always be this easy." Every word struck me like a mirror reflecting the truth I had ignored for decades. She had seen the future 20 years before it unfolded, but I, blinded by guilt and love, refused to listen. That night I did something unusual. I opened a bottle of wine I had been saving for years, a 1995 Cabernet reserved for a special occasion. As I poured the glass, I realized I had been saving everything for later. I had been saving happiness, saving dreams, always postponing my own life so I could solve Daniel's endless problems. The wine was rich and perfect, but it carried a taste of regret. I continued flipping through Patriciana's notebook and found more pieces of her heart. There were lists of things she wanted to do, places she longed to visit, dreams she believed would come true once Daniel was grown. One page said, "Antonio and I want to travel to Patagonia. We'll wait for Daniel to graduate from college." She never made it that far. Patriciana died before Daniel even finished high school, and Patagonia remained only a dream that never touched reality. On the following pages, her wishes continued. "I want to learn Italian. Antonio should go back to playing his guitar. We need to see the ocean in the Bahamas. He should write about life on his father's farm. I want Antonio to buy that piece of land in the countryside he always admired. We need to get a dog." Each line was a reminder of how much we had put on hold, always waiting for a better time, a time that never came. Holding her notebook in my hands, I realized that while I had been busy saving Daniel from the world, I had let my own life slip away. In one section of the notebook, Patriciana had written, "Antonio should retire at 65 and finally enjoy life." But every dream had been postponed, waiting for the day Daniel would be truly independent. The hardest page to read was a list titled "Things to Do When Daniel is Independent." It was so simple, yet so full of hope. Number 1, travel across America in an RV. Number 2, Antonio learns how to fish. Number 3, renovate the house the way we always imagined. Number 4, start a small herb garden. Number 5, adopt a stray dog. Number 6, Antonio, go back to painting. You were so talented when young. Number 7, take that dance class we always talked about. Number 8, visit Niagara Falls. Number 9, spend 1 month living by the sea in a beach house. Number 10, Antonio, write your memoirs. Daniel had been financially independent since graduating medical school at 22, but he had never grown emotionally independent. And I, foolishly waiting for him to mature, had let every dream in that notebook gather dust. I closed the notebook with heavy hands and looked around my silent house. When was the last time I had done something purely for myself? When was the last time I bought something without guilt, without worrying about Daniel's endless emergencies? When was the last time I woke up thinking of what I wanted to do instead of what my son needed? The next morning, I finally acted. I picked up the phone and called a travel agency. My voice shook a little as I said, "I want to see Patagonia, alone, as soon as possible." The agent sounded cheerful and warm. "How wonderful, sir. Patagonia is a dream destination. When would you like to go?" I laughed softly and answered, "Yesterday." It was the first real laugh I had let out in weeks. She laughed back, understanding the urgency. "I completely understand, Mr. Antonio," I corrected her gently. "Victor Alvarez." She paused before asking, "May I ask what inspired this sudden decision?" I took a breath and replied, "My wife always wanted to see Patagonia. She died 20 years ago, and I never went. I've realized she's not coming back, but I can still go for both of us." On the other end, there was silence, then a soft voice. "That is beautiful, Mr. Alvarez. I will personally take care of your trip. It will be special." 2 weeks later, I was on a plane to Buenos Aires with a new backpack and a heart pounding like a boy about to begin his first adventure. At 71, I was finally taking my first international trip alone. Sitting by the window, staring out at the clouds, I whispered, "Dear, we're finally going to Patagonia." And Patagonia changed me. I walked across glaciers that had existed for thousands of years. I watched condors soar above mountains, so high they made my problems feel small and laughable. I slept under a sky crowded with stars, a sky so vast it reminded me how brief life is and how foolish I had been to waste so much of it in fear. In El Calafate, I met a group of Brazilian travelers, including a retired couple from São Paulo, Patricia and Schwang, who had been exploring the world for 5 years without stopping. One evening, as we sat by a quiet Patagonian lake, sharing a bottle of Argentine wine, Patricia looked at me with gentle eyes and asked, "Antonio, may I ask you something personal? Do you have children?" I nodded. "I have one son. He's 38, a doctor." Her face lit up. "How wonderful! He must be proud of his adventurous father." I gave a small, bitter laugh. "Actually, we haven't spoken in weeks." Joe leaned closer, curious. "A family argument?" And then, without knowing why, the words poured out. Maybe it was the wine loosening my tongue, maybe the distance from home, maybe the strange comfort of speaking to people who would never judge me again once I left. I told them everything. The Mercedes, the $50 gift card, the $340,000 taken over 2 years, the public humiliation, and the final decision to cut off the money. Patricia and Carlos listened silently, not interrupting once. When I finished, Patricia reached for my hand. "Antonio," she said softly, "may I share our story with you?" I nodded. She took a deep breath. "We had 3 children. Our youngest, Paolo, was almost the mirror of your Daniel, always needing help, always in crisis, always with some new plan that seemed promising, if only we gave just one more loan." Carlos picked up the story. "We supported Paolo until he was 42. We paid for his apartment, his car, his divorce, his debts, his failed businesses. He had 2 children and always used them as emotional weapons. He would say, 'If you don't help, my kids will suffer.' And of course, we always gave in." I leaned forward. "And what happened?" Carlos's eyes darkened. "One day, we discovered Paolo had forged our signatures on a $100,000 loan. He looked at us calmly and said he knew we would forgive him because we were his parents." My stomach clenched. "And did you?" Patricia slowly shook her head. "No. That day we cut him off completely. It was the hardest decision we ever made, Antonio, but also the best. It took Paolo 3 long years, but he rebuilt himself from the ground up. Now he works hard, takes care of his children, and comes to us not for money, but for love. Our relationship with him is better today than it has ever been." Carlos raised his glass, his voice firm. "To parents who are brave enough to say no." The 3 of us toasted under the Patagonian stars, and for the first time in many months, I felt certainty in my heart that I had chosen the right path. The rest of that trip became a rebirth. I bought a guitar in Buenos Aires and began relearning the songs I had played in my youth. I signed up for an intensive tango course. Yes, at 71 I was learning to dance tango on my own. I wandered through museums, sat in fine restaurants where I ordered without glancing at the prices, and for the first time in decades, I bought gifts for myself simply because I wanted them. In Ushuaia, the city at the end of the world, I wrote a letter to my beloved Patriciana. "Dear, we finally made it to the end of the world. Patagonia is even more beautiful than we dreamed. The mountains rise like giants that touch the sky, and the sea glows with a blue that exists nowhere else. I'm sorry it took me 20 years to keep our promise. But on this journey, I have learned so much. I learned in Patagonia that it is never too late to start living. I discovered that real love sometimes must be strong and even harsh to be true. And I realized that you, Patriciana, had been right about Daniel all along. When I returned, I promised myself I would follow your list. I would plant an herb garden, I would adopt a dog, I would return to painting, and I would finally live for both of us, for you who no longer could, and for me who had at last understood how. With all my love, Antonio." When I came back from Patagonia, I was tanned, 10 pounds lighter, and carried a clarity I had not felt in decades. I bought a guitar in Buenos Aires and started relearning the songs I once played in my youth. I enrolled in an online Italian course, something we had always dreamed of. For the first time in years, I woke each morning eager for the day ahead. I followed Patriciana's list faithfully. I adopted Rocky, a black mutt I rescued from the street, and he quickly became my most loyal companion. I planted an herb garden that soon had neighbors stopping by just to admire it. I returned to painting and was surprised to see my hands still remembered the gentle art of watercolors. I even joined a dance academy. Yes, at 71, I began learning salsa alongside other seniors. I made new friends, real ones, and rediscovered the joy of sharing life with people who cared about me, not my bank account. I bought a used pickup truck and started traveling across America, finally seeing the places I had postponed for decades. I walked the sand dunes of Oregon, stood before the rushing waterfalls of Yosemite, and breathed in the quiet air of empty beaches in Northern California. In each place, I carried a photograph of Patriciana, holding it up to the sky and whispering, "Look, dear, we made it here too." It was on a Thursday afternoon, 3 months after returning from Patagonia, while I was gently strumming "The Way You Look Tonight" on my guitar, that the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Daniel standing there. His clothes were wrinkled, dark circles underlined his eyes, and he had grown thin, looking as if he had aged 10 years in just 3 months. "Hi, Dad," he said, his voice small, almost childlike, a sound I had not heard from him since he was a boy. "Daniel?" I asked, not opening the door fully. "What do you want?" He looked down at the ground. "Can I come in, please?" I hesitated, but after a moment I stepped aside and allowed him in. He walked slowly through the house, glancing around as though he were entering for the first time. And in many ways it was new. The walls covered with my paintings, photos of Patagonia framed on the table, green plants filling corners, Rocky sleeping peacefully in the armchair, and the guitar resting on the sofa. You're different," Daniel murmured, noticing my tan and the changes around him. "I'm living my life," I replied simply. He swallowed hard. "Dad, I came to apologize, truly, and I came to tell you that you were right about everything." I sat down in my armchair, but didn't offer him a seat. "Go on," I said. His voice cracked. "I lost my job at the hospital." Daniel lowered his head as he spoke, his voice broken. Alejandro had removed him from the medical team the moment he could no longer keep up appearances. The Mercedes was taken back by the bank, and Sophia had told him she wanted to separate. He paused, waiting for me to react, but I stayed quiet. He went on, saying the apartment was now in foreclosure and they had been forced to move into a much smaller rental. The boys had left private school, and Sophia was working long shifts as a nurse in a public hospital to cover basic expenses. Still, I said nothing. Then his words tumbled out in desperation. He told me that without my money, he had realized he was nothing, that his whole life had been built on lies. I turned my eyes to him slowly and asked, "And what do you expect me to do with this confession?" He looked stunned, as if he had believed I would rush to embrace him. "I thought you would be happy to know I finally understood my mistakes," he whispered. I let out a heavy sigh. "Why would I ever take joy in your suffering, Daniel?" He shook his head quickly. "No, not that. But you always told me that consequences would be the only teacher I'd listen to, and you were right." I stood up and walked to the window where my herb garden grew green and full of life. "Daniel, what did you imagine would happen when you came here? Did you expect me to pity you, call you my poor little son, and start paying for your life again?" His eyes watered as he shook his head. "No, Dad. I came to ask for something else. I want a chance to rebuild our relationship." I turned and looked straight at him. "What relationship, Daniel? We never truly had one. What we had was a business arrangement, a commercial exchange that wore the mask of love between father and son." His face twisted. "That's not true, is it?" But even he didn't sound convinced. "When was the last time you came here without needing money?" I asked firmly. "When was the last time you asked me how I was doing, what I felt, or what dreams I still carried?" He fell into silence, unable to answer. I pressed further. "When was the last time you gave me something that came from your hard work, not from my wallet? When was the last time you looked at me with genuine interest in my life?" His mouth opened, but no words came. I answered for him, "I'll tell you when, Daniel. Never. In 38 years, you never once gave me anything that was truly yours." I sat back down, my voice steady. "Do you know what I have discovered in these past few months? I discovered who I really am when I stopped being your personal bank. I discovered I still have my own dreams, that I can be happy without carrying your burdens. I learned that I can have friends, that I can travel, that I can dance, that I can love a dog, that I can plant a garden. I realized I had been alive all this time, but not living." His voice cracked as he muttered, "I didn't know you felt that way." Tears rolled down his cheeks. "Dad, please, just one chance. Let me prove I can be the son you deserve." I shook my head gently. "And how will you do that, Daniel?" He stammered. "I don't know. Tell me what to do." I stood again, looking at him with tired eyes. "There is the problem. Even now, you still expect me to guide you, to hand you a manual on how to be a decent son." I looked at Daniel and felt the weight of years pressing down. "You are 38 years old," I said slowly. "If you still don't know how to respect your father, how to value the people who truly love you, how to carry yourself with dignity, then perhaps it is already too late." His eyes filled with panic. "It's never too late, Dad. You always told me that." I shook my head. "I told you many things over the years, Daniel, some of them wrong. That was one of them." I walked toward the door, opened it, and stood firm. "I'm going to say something now that I should have told you 20 years ago. I am no longer going to save you from yourself." "Dad, please," he whispered. I raised my hand to stop him. "Listen carefully, because this is the last time I will explain it. If you want any kind of relationship with me in the future, it must be built on respect, not on money. That means you come to see me because you want my company, not my wallet. You treat me as your father, not your employer. You build your own life with your own hands, and you learn who I am as a person, not as an endless account to withdraw from." His voice broke. "But what if I really need help?" I looked at him with steady eyes. "Then you will learn the difference between wanting and needing, between convenience and true emergency, between your pride being hurt and a real necessity." He froze at the threshold, his face pale. "Dad, how long will it take for you to forgive me?" I breathed deeply. "Daniel, I forgave you already. Forgiveness is for my peace, not yours. But forgiveness does not mean going back to being a fool." He swallowed hard. "So we won't have a father and son relationship anymore?" I nodded firmly. "We will have the relationship you choose to build if you learn to value me as a man, not just as a provider. If you learn to respect me as more than an ATM, if you finally learn to love me without taking advantage of me, then, and only then, we may have something real." His lips trembled. "And if I can't?" I looked at the man who was still my son, but felt like a stranger. "Then I will still be fine, Daniel, because I have finally learned that my happiness does not depend on you loving me in the right way." He stepped down from the porch, moving slowly, and turned one last time. "Dad, I love you." I nodded sadly. "I know you do, Daniel, but you never learned how to show love without putting a price tag on it." He walked away, his figure swallowed by the night. 2 years passed after that day at the door. In the first 6 months, Daniel tried to come around a few times. He would begin with gentle words, "How are you, Dad?" But before long, the conversation would slip into, "Could you lend me just this once?" Or, "I'm in a difficult situation, Dad." Each time I sent him away, kind in tone but firm in decision. Eventually the visits stopped. Later I heard from Sophia, who still brought the children to see me, that Daniel had moved to the countryside. He had taken a modest job at a small public hospital and was living much more simply than before. Sophia came to see me one Sunday, while Ethan and Noah played joyfully with Rocky in the backyard. She looked at me with a thoughtful expression and said, "He's different now, father-in-law, more humble, more present with the children." She paused, then added, "We're still separated, but I can see he's really trying to change." I asked her gently, "And how do you feel about that?" She sighed, her face torn between hope and pain. "Confused. For years I lived in a lifestyle I thought was stability, but now I realize it was all built on a lie. At first I was angry with you for cutting off the money. I thought you ruined everything. But now I see it might have been the best thing that could have happened. The boys respect their father more now. He plays with them, talks to them, teaches them things. Before, he only tried to buy their love with expensive gifts. And the two of you, I asked, is there a chance for reconciliation? Sophia nodded softly. We're in therapy together. I had to learn how to love the real Daniel, not the image of wealth I thought he was. And he is learning how to be a real husband, not just a man pretending to provide. Her words stayed with me. Life, I had discovered, had its surprises even after 70. I had finished my Italian course and even traveled to Tuscany with friends from my dance class. I had learned to cook meals I always wanted to try, and finally wrote a book filled with stories from my father's farm. A small publisher released it, and to my surprise, it sold well across the region. In the library's book club, I met Teresa, a widow of 68, with 3 independent children and a smile that warmed every room. We never married, but we shared dinners 3 times a week and traveled together whenever we could. She understood my story with Daniel because she had lived through something similar with a son who battled addiction. One evening as we tended to my garden, she told me, true love sometimes has to be firm. Love that demands nothing in return becomes weakness, and weakness ends up destroying the ones we love. Teresa taught me I could share love without giving up my own independence, that I could care deeply without losing myself, and that happiness did not have to come from carrying other people's burdens. It was on a Sunday afternoon, exactly 2 years after that painful conversation with Daniel, when I heard a knock at the door. This time he was different. He looked thinner, yes, but his posture was straighter, and his eyes were clear, free from the desperate anxiety that once defined him. Beside him stood Ethan and Noah, full of life. "Hi, Dad," Daniel said quietly. The boys ran toward me with open arms, shouting, "Grandpa Antonio." My heart tightened as I realized how much they had grown, how much precious time had passed. "Dad said we could visit you," Ethan exclaimed. I bent down to hug them tightly. "Of course you can," I told them. "You always can." Then I turned to Daniel and met his gaze. "Come in." This time it truly felt different. Daniel didn't come with excuses or hidden requests. He came as a son. He played with the boys in the backyard, laughed with them, and even helped me prepare lunch. He asked about my garden, about Rocky, and about the trips I had taken, listening with real interest. Not once did he mention money. At lunch, little Ethan looked up at me proudly and said, "Grandpa, Dad works at a small hospital now. He helps poor people who can't pay for private doctors." I turned to Daniel, surprised. "Really?" I asked. He nodded, his voice calm and honest, not defensive like before. "Yes, it's more rewarding than I ever thought." I asked him, "And do you earn well?" He smiled faintly. "Not much, but enough for what we need." After lunch, while the children played, Daniel asked softly, "Dad, can we talk?" We went out to the porch, and he sat down beside me. For the first time, I noticed peace in his face, a calm that had never been there before. "You look good," he said, glancing around. "You look younger, happier." I smiled. "I'm finally living for myself after so many years. That's why." He nodded, and instead of judging me like he used to, he simply accepted it. Then he said, "Dad, I came here to thank you." I raised my eyebrows. "Thank me?" He took a breath. "Yes, thank you for cutting me off, for forcing me to grow up at 38. I stayed quiet, letting him speak. "In these last 2 years," he continued, "I've learned things I should have learned at 20. I discovered that hard work feels different when you do it because you must, not because someone else carries you. I found out that a small house feels warmer when it's paid with your own effort. I realized my children respect me more now that I stand as a real man, not a shadow." He paused, staring at his hands before lifting his eyes again. "And I also learned that I loved you in the wrong way. I loved you like a man loves a provider, not like a son loves his father." Now I see you for who you really are. A man who gave his best years for me, who deserved to have lived for himself long before 71. A man I never truly knew because I only cared about what he could give me. Then, with a trembling voice, he said, "Dad, I didn't come here to rebuild what we had. I came to begin something new from the start. A bond where I know you as Antonio, not just as Daniel's father." My eyes filled with tears for the first time in years. "And how would that bond look?" I asked softly. He smiled. "I don't know. Maybe we just discover it together, without pressure, without demands. Two men tied by history, finally learning to know each other." I looked at him, my son who had finally grown into a man, and I smiled back. "I would like that very much, Daniel." Today, a year after that moment, Daniel comes to see me every 2 weeks, not for money, not for favors, but simply to talk about his work, about the boys, about the lessons he's learning, and about the projects I continue to build in my own life. Daniel reconciled with Sophia, but this time it was on a foundation of truth, not on illusions paid for by someone else's money. Last month, he surprised me with a gift. It wasn't expensive or flashy. It was a simple wooden frame he had crafted with his own hands. Inside was a photo of us from when he was a child. On the frame he had carved the words, "To the man who taught me that true love sometimes means saying no." That frame meant more to me than all the expensive things he had ever given, because it carried his effort, his heart, and his humility. Teresa and I also continue our journey together. She comes with me whenever the grandchildren visit, and they adore her. They call her Grandma Teresa. She teaches Ethan bits of Italian, bakes with Noah, and brings laughter into the house. We may not be a traditional family, but we are a real one, rooted in honesty, respect, and love. This week, Daniel gave me an invitation I never expected. "Dad," he said, "would you like to come with me on a medical trip to the countryside? I'll be spending a week in a small town that has no doctor. I thought you might like to see the countryside, and I'd like your company." I looked at him, surprised, and asked, "Why would you want my company?" His answer touched me deeply. "Because over these past months, I've realized you are an interesting man. You have stories I've never heard, lessons I've never asked for, wisdom I never cared to know. I'd like to learn from you." I agreed, and next week for the first time, father and son will travel side by side as two grown men who respect each other. This story was never truly about money. It was always about dignity. I finally understood that letting people mistreat you in the name of love is not generosity, it is helping them destroy themselves. I learned that the greatest mistake a father can make is to shield a son from the consequences of his own choices. I learned that love without boundaries becomes weakness, and weakness leads to ruin. And above all, I learned that it is never too late to choose dignity. So if you're living something similar, if you feel used by the very people who should care for you, remember this: you don't need to pay to be loved. You don't have to trade your sacrifices for scraps of affection. Sometimes the most loving word you can say is no. Sometimes the kindest thing is to let others face their own failures. And sometimes losing a relationship is the only way to truly save it. Life is far too short to waste it begging for respect. Always choose dignity. If my story speaks to you, share your thoughts in the comments below and mention the city where you're watching from. Your experience could help someone else facing the same struggles. And don't forget to subscribe to the Infidelity Tales Hub channel. Give this video a like and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.